Our next speaker is one of our sponsors for the day, Amanda Forster, who's the Executive Manager at the Office of the Customer Advocate for Suncorp, and she'll be talking to us about creating a better outcomes for customers experiencing vulnerability. So Amanda, I welcome you to the stage.
Rebecca, what a hard act to follow. That was fantastic. Thank you. And welcome to those of you who are joining us online. So it's my absolute pleasure to be here to share the journey of Suncorp. I'd like to say that it's a journey, not a destination, because as Rebecca spoke about, we are evolving and maturing, but I'm excited to share more. Before I get started, I am going to talk about suicidal ideation and also domestic violence, which may be triggering for some people, so I just want to call that out. I'm going to talk about the role of the customer advocate and a little bit about our journey to build a strategy to support customers in vulnerable circumstances or those with unique accessibility needs. So I want to start with a customer quote. "For what it's worth, she saved me. She actually did. What she has done is ensure my two boys still have a dad." Pretty powerful quote. And that's an extract from customer feedback. I'll give you a bit of background on this customer. His name is Dan. He was caught in an investment scam, and by the time he realised he was being scammed and he let us know, the money was already gone. So when he was talking to our frontline team, he said, "I feel like I'm spiralling out of control and I don't know what to do." And our frontline team member immediately realised this is a flag of vulnerability and I know immediately what to do. And Dan was triaged to our vulnerability hub or our specialist team. And I like to think about the people in our hubs as being the heroes in our hubs. They have two roles. One is to try and get the customer back on track from a products and services perspective, and the other is to refer the customer to the experts, the financial counsellors, because we're certainly not psychologists and financial counsellors. So Dan met Alicia from our hub, and Alicia suggested that Dan could talk to a financial counsellor, and the financial counsellor suggested that he could consolidate his debts, which Alicia supported him through. And at the end, he sent a very long email to Alicia's manager, and that is just a snip. And why I share it today is it really demonstrates the important role everyone has, particularly those in industry, to support customers, identify red flags, and triage customers to the right teams at the right time. So I am from the Customer Advocate Office. Our Customer Advocate is Andrew Chan-Mugan. For some of you that may not know about the Customer Advocate role, it was established in 2016. In response, the ABA set it up to create trust between consumers and the bank and give consumers a one point of contact. So we have there is some principles online. We've created a charter out of that. But really there's four things that we do. We raise the voice of our customers across the organisation. We do this in a variety of ways. We facilitate better outcomes. We engage those in the community, those with lived experience. We facilitate better outcomes in dispute resolution. We facilitate things called solve rooms. So often when a customer's in a vulnerable circumstance, they've probably spoken to a lot of teams. So we want to get all the teams together to understand who's going to lead the customer through this next phase of their journey and who we should engage with externally. And then also thematic reviews. I also wanted to share this little snip that shows Suncorp's actually bigger than you think. We're a very large insurer and a small bank. So there's 14,000 employees and millions of customers. So especially important for us to be looking at this space. When we think about vulnerability and we built our strategy, we wanted to do it through the lens of our customer. So we wanted to think about the customer journey not our journey, but their journey. And so we have 3 phases we've built our strategy around. It's now called our ecosystem. So the first phase is the reactive phase. So when a customer presents and things are probably going a little pear-shaped for them, or maybe an individual on the phone, a specialist, realises there's a red flag. So how do we identify that and we triage them to the right team at the right time? Our proactive strategy. So I have a bit of a mantra for this one. It's called Data for Good. And if only Suncorp knew what Suncorp knows, because we know a lot. We've got a lot of data. So how do we use it for good? And the third pillar is our preventative pillar. So can we stop a vulnerability from occurring in the first place? So I'm going to dig into each of these pillars. So our reactive pillar is underpinned by what we call our 4R model: recognising the vulnerability, reviewing it, responding to the customer and referring. The review phase is really important because vulnerability appears on a spectrum. So my mum's elderly, but if you said to her, you're vulnerable, she would, potentially in vulnerable circumstances, she would have something to tell you about that. But when you think about other characteristics that might happen to her, maybe if she's socially isolated or if she's caught in a scam, she immediately becomes very vulnerable. So we like to think about vulnerability on a spectrum, and therefore the way we tailor our service to a customer must depend on that spectrum. So review, respond to the customer and refer, and that we have 3 referral pathways. I'll talk about that in a second. So those 4R framework is underpinned by our ecosystem, and it's a big ecosystem. I just want to talk to a few of those things. Policies, standards and guidelines. We had to be super clear about what our expectations were when a customer was experiencing vulnerability. With 14,000 people, we had to be very clear. So my team is accountable for the standard, the accessibility and the vulnerability standard. We oversight that and we make sure that everyone is very clear about their roles and responsibilities. We have our triage team, our specialised team, which I spoke about earlier. We have 4 tiers of training, and I can see Sue in the audience from Uniting, who has done a fantastic job supporting us on our training. So we have, if you imagine it like a triangle, at the very lowest, at the base of the triangle, is the training that goes to most people. It's about understanding and awareness of vulnerability, and also an understanding of how you might better support customers with unique accessibility needs. The second tier of training is for our specialists. The third tier is face-to-face training. And then the 4th tier is what we call just-in-time training. So when we realise there's a gap, how do we quickly get around that? We like to make sure that we're learning from those with lived experience. And so I mentioned Uniting earlier. They've come in and done a full review, both in 2008 and then again, 2018 and then again in 2021. And they mentioned, some of their words were that it was transformational, our change, so it's something that I'm extremely proud of. And our referral pathways, again, if you think about it like a triangle, most customers will just need a passive referral. So they just need to be told that maybe this is the contact number for Financial Counselling Australia, or this is a contact number for Beyond Blue. Then the middle pathway, less customers, not as intense, but the next phase is phone-based counselling. We use Caring for that, and that's a facilitated referral. So we ask them to contact the customer. We ask Caring to contact the customer. And then the very top is face-to-face interventions. All of that, of course, through customer consent. I thought I would share this toolkit with you. Under the proactive pillar, we've done a lot of different work thinking about scams. We did a piece of work with QUT, and we developed a scam victim propensity hypothesis. We also did the work with the Butterfly Project, and more recently we have spent quite a lot of time engaging with problematic gamblers to understand where the role the bank has to prevent gambling harm. And it's interesting because when I go to a barbecue and I say to people, do you think the bank should look at people's banking data and then contact them and say, we're worried about you, you're at risk of gambling harm? People say, yes, you should. If it's my husband, if it's my friend, if it's my neighbour, you should absolutely call them and contact them. And I say, well, what if it's you? How would you feel if we called you? And they say, oh no, don't call me. Don't look at my data. So it's very polarising, and it's something that we're still working through and exploring, but the toolkit you'll see, a key recommendation is, across industry, banks should be looking at their data to identify problematic gamblers. And I think the people experience, I feel like Rebecca should have a red card anytime I use deficit language. People experiencing harm from problematic gambling. So we're still working through that. I think what we need to understand is, and once we've built the model, what's the customer engagement model? Once we've built the AI, what's the customer engagement model? Who do we call? And there's a lot of research from the UK that says customers don't want to be called, they want a digital nudge. They don't want you to call them when they're picking up the children from school and have a conversation about potentially being overcommitted on their banking products. So digital interactions, and so that's what we're working through at the moment. In the preventative space, I'm going to share 3 stats with you that I think really highlight why this work for me is so important. The first is, which I'm sure many of you know, I'm preaching to the converted, 45% of Australians are financially illiterate. 45% of Australians. The second is some research from Princeton, which says that it's about cognitive deficit. So when people are under financial pressure, they will lose up to 13 points of IQ, which is similar to a good night's sleep. So if you imagine, I've got 2 children, I've had many nights where I haven't had a good night's sleep, and some mornings I think maybe I shouldn't be driving. So can you imagine the impaired decision-making that people are experiencing with the lack of financial literacy? So just a couple of reflections there. So I think, and the last one, is reading levels. I find this astounding. And there are 5 reading levels that Australians are categorised into, and so 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, and level 5 is diploma level or above. So what percentage do you think of Australians are reading level 5, because that's the way we write, that's how documents are shared with customers, thinking about all industries, how we communicate, how we write letters to them. 1.2% of customers, Australians, are in reading level 5. So it's imperative that when we're communicating, we're thinking about that customer holistically, their literacy, where they are, their decision-making capability, what they're understanding. So with that in mind, a couple of programs that support our final pillar. I'm so proud of this partnership we have with the Financial Basics Foundation. This isn't about us going in and selling products in schools. This is about us giving teachers the toolkits to be able to teach financial literacy. And then the second piece of work that we have on at the moment, really, it would be about me doing myself out of my role, because it's called Customer by Design. And I have a hypothesis that often we think about that specialist, that person that's talking to the customer is accountable for the customer experience, but I don't agree. I actually think the people furthest away are the ones that have the biggest impact on that customer experience, because it's how this person was trained. It was how they were recruited. It's what their KPIs are. It's what their leader talks about. It's how the products are designed. It's the systems that enable that interaction. So if we truly think about customer by design, we won't just be thinking about that individual in the reactive space. We'll be thinking about all of that journey that leads the customer to that point and how we design products. So I'm building a playbook. We're in the second round of review, which is very exciting, and it has key principles. One of the principles is designing for access for all, because if we can get it right for cohorts that need additional support, can you imagine how simple it will be for everyone? So that's one of the key principles, thinking about things like universal design principles or hints and tips on how you might communicate using an active voice or shorter sentences. And then another principle, I would like to advocate for the work of Rachna Bauman. If you haven't seen her work around safety by design, and I'm sure there was a whole raft of other people that have worked on that with her, but I've just been liaising with Rachna. Highly recommend it, because unwittingly, we are helping perpetrators commit economic abuse. We don't mean to, but it's the way our systems and processes are set up. I don't know if you've heard about the abuse in transactions, but perpetrators were weaponising our payment system to send 1 and 2 cent messages with horrific messages in them. We reviewed some of the content that that perpetrators were extending to people experiencing domestic violence, and it was horrific. So we didn't mean for that to happen. So what else is happening within our products and services that we're not even aware of, that we should be thinking about how we design from the beginning to prevent that? So that principle is called design for protection, and Catherine Fitzpatrick's doing some great work in the bank and also in the general insurance space, and happy to share any of those papers with you. And then another principle is designing to prevent the unintended consequences. Because when we're developing programs of work, we don't do it to generate complaints. We don't do it to generate poor experiences, but making sure that we're thinking about the consequences and the downstream impact. So that's a little bit about our journey in the reactive, proactive and preventative space. I'll just share another customer quote with you. And this came from a lady who, I think we just waived her excess. It was a general insurance customer, so and provided her with some external referral partners. But after her experience, the relief she experienced, she sat in her car and she recorded a video message that she sobbed through, and she sent it back to us because she was just so relieved. And so we took that and we shared it with some of our senior leaders, because they're the ones that advocate for this. They're the ones that encourage us on our journey. So just an excerpt from her quote is, "As a survivor of domestic violence, I truly am so thankful for your generosity and understanding. It takes a lot of strength to reach out and ask for help and to acknowledge my situation. So thank you for not leaving me out to dry. It's these little acts of kindness that give me the strength to keep going." So again, bringing the customer's voice into the room to really highlight the important role that each of us have in this space. Thank you.
Turn that mic on, which is always a useful thing to do. Again, some questions, please. I mean, again, thought-provoking area that Amanda's been talking about, so I'm sure there's a question. So if you have a question, please put your hand up, and we'll bring a microphone around to you. Just can you check online also for questions as well, please?
No questions at this stage.
Well, I'm going to kick the ball off and get it rolling.
I got out of it.
No, never get out of it, Amanda, not at all. You know, excuse me, I think you mentioned, the notion of scams are increasing quite a lot, and there's a lot of the scams are increasing quite a lot, and a lot of people are becoming vulnerable as a function of being engaged in scams. How have you seen that being played out across the different, I guess, life stage cohorts, from younger right through to older customers?
I think if anyone could take one thing away, it's very clear scams do not discriminate. That we see people, the social engineering that we see is just incredible. So we think that it's a little old lady at her computer, but it's certainly not. They are very clever in the way they socially engineer people to to get involved in a scam. Perhaps I can give you an example. Someone was contacted by Telstra to help prevent scam victimisation by trying to convince a bank to send money, and they were going to show that they didn't ask the right questions. So the customer had in their pocket, this wasn't one of our customers, it was just a story that we're talking to another bank, had his phone in his pocket with an earbud in, the scammer was talking to him. So the employee at the bank was saying, tell me more about this $10,000 transfer, which the scammer had pretended to put into his account. They've been using remote access magic to make him appear that he had this $10,000. And the scammer was telling him exactly what to say. So when the bank was asking all the right questions, the scammer was just rebuttaling all of it. And unfortunately, he did lose that $10,000 because all the right questions we were asking. It's very complex. And I think that it is a whole of bank response. We have a federated scam strategy that involves all of our areas, from our communication, internal and external communications team, training, frontline awareness building, and it's a reactive strategy that we continue to build and grow on because it's maturing and evolving, but in the silence is where it grows. So I encourage each of you, if you can take one action away, go home and talk to your family and your friends about the Hey Mum scam, because the people are still falling for it, about the bank employee scams. People are still falling for it. We will never call you and ask you to transfer money. We will never do that. So that would be, if you could do that, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Do we have, yes.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you. Just in terms of the scams, as you were talking, there was a few things I was thinking about. One is that we've done lots of work with fraud squads around how to have respectful conversations with consumers who have been scammed.
Yeah.
And in talking with hundreds of people who have been taken in, for want of a better description, two things stuck out to me. It was not about the money for the consumer, it was about the relationship. And the smarter you are, the easier you are to scam.
Yes, I would.
And that is not what I expected to say.
Yes, yeah. And one of the heartbreaking, I completely agree with you, Sue. One of the heartbreaking things is scambling. People will be scammed. The propensity for people it's the re-victimisation. So if we think about scams through primary, secondary and tertiary phases, so they're not quite engaged with the scammer yet, but they're a likely victim. They're engaged with the scammer, potentially sending money. They're potentially a money mule and they don't even know. They think they're moving money around for their partner who's a captain overseas, but really what they're being sent is other victims' money to move around for the scammer. And then the tertiary phase, where customers are more likely to be scammed again because they've lost their money. We had a gentleman who thought the FBI had contacted him and had recovered his $200,000. So, of course, when he was told that, he just needed to pay 10%, which he borrowed from his sister, and we quickly caught. We had to get the FBI to call him to explain to him it's not true because he was so convinced, but the likelihood, if I just give them $20,000, I could get my $200,000 back. It's heartbreaking.
People live on hope.
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? I've got a burning one again, so it's all about me this morning as much as anything else. The financial literacy issue, or financial illiteracy issue, I think is a big one, particularly as it fosters conditions for increased likelihood of vulnerability.
Yes.
How do we deal with the financial literacy element? How do we increase financial literacy or provide people with the ability to be more financially literate and address some of those issues around being vulnerable or potential for being vulnerable?
I think it's education. And so key to that, obviously, being a partnership early on, making sure that people are, that education starts early around financial literacy, but it goes back to being very clear in the documents very clear about what are you buying, I think that ensuring we make our documentation consumable. I did hear that Lloyd's of London, and this is old, but that may be outdated, rewrote all their customer communication to reading age 11. So I think that's a fantastic example of potentially meeting customers where they need to be in the way you communicate with them. So I think education's key.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Amanda. If you could put your hands together for Amanda.